In a dramatic twist that has caught the attention of global economists and policymakers alike, Canada, long regarded as America's steadfast energy partner, has abruptly shut down the $13 billion oil export pipeline to the United States. This unexpected move has left Washington reeling and scrambling to mount a response as Canada not only ceases supplying oil and gas to its southern neighbor, but also accelerates a broader realignment of its trade priorities. For decades, Canada supplied energy and stability to the U.S. market. But with the recent decision to halt energy exports, the foundations of that relationship are crumbling, and the impact is being felt in unprecedented ways across the North American continent. The decision to cut off energy exports has precipitated an immediate surge in prices for gas, oil, and electricity throughout the United States. Millions of Americans are now confronting soaring costs that affect nearly every area of daily life, from the routines of commuting to the soaring expense of air travel. Industries that rely on stable energy pricing, such as aviation, transportation, manufacturing, and even public services, are suddenly grappling with steep budget increases. The ripple effects are deeply unsettling, with sectors such as automobile, steel, and food production forced to curtail operations as energy costs become unsustainable. In many states, including New York, California, and Michigan, the threat of rolling blackouts looms, particularly with the winter months fast approaching, when energy consumption peaks and hydroelectric supplies from Canada had long been seen as a buffer. The roots of this dramatic shift lie in long-standing trade tensions that have simmered under the surface for years. Washington's reliance on Canada's abundant energy resources was once taken for granted, largely because the U.S. had imposed heavy trade tariffs on Canadian goods with the assumption that Canada, a neighbor bound by shared economic interests, would accept the conditions without much fuss. However, the Canadian government had repeatedly warned that such tactics could trigger a strategic pivot, a pivot that has now come to fruition. In a decisive move, Canada not only stopped oil exports to the United States, but also signed long-term contracts with economic giants such as China and India, the largest energy markets in the world. This is no mere reactive measure. It is a calculated economic strategy aimed at reducing Canada's dependence on the U.S. market, while simultaneously positioning itself as a leading energy supplier to other global economies in Europe and Asia. These sweeping changes have swiftly transformed the global energy landscape. With the U.S. losing its critical energy supply from Canada, alternative markets have eagerly stepped into the breach. Europe, still recovering from its fraught reliance on Russian energy, has welcomed Canada's new energy agreements with open arms. At the same time, China and India have secured long-term deals to maintain the energy thrust necessary for their rapidly expanding economies. The diversification of Canada's export ports and pipeline systems, from their historic orientation towards North America to routes aimed at Europe and Asia, signals a pivotal change in the global energy balance. It's as if Canada has decided that the old adage, "never put all your eggs in one basket," applies not only to household finances, but also to national energy security. And while Americans might be left scratching their heads, it certainly seems that the Canadian pipeline was due for a vacation. The unfolding consequences of these shifts are profound and multifaceted. Major industries across the U.S. now face a dual dilemma: an immediate energy crisis compounded by the loss of a key strategic position in the global energy market. This crisis is not a transient blip on the radar, but a fundamental restructuring of economic relations. With over $700 billion in trade activities and more than 100,000 jobs at stake, the breakdown of this once unassailable economic bond between the United States and Canada is triggering significant disruptions. The economic repercussions span from steep increases in the prices of essential goods, fuel, food, and public services, to severe declines in various sectors that once thrived on stable trade relationships. American businesses, accustomed to predictable patterns of investment, tourism, and cross-border commerce, now find themselves in a state of flux as costs spiral and confidence wanes. Simultaneously, a broader realignment is underway in Canada itself. No longer content to remain in a dependent role, Canadian economic stakeholders are embracing measures that signal a newfound determination to assert national independence. Individual investors, who once viewed the U.S. market as a safe haven, have begun pulling back, And a noticeable migration of small businesses sourcing goods from Europe and Asia has accelerated this realignment. Major retail chains and local governments alike are increasingly seeking alternatives to American suppliers, reflecting a broader sentiment that has evolved into a nationwide movement. Some Canadian companies have publicly declared that they have no intention of returning to the American market anytime soon. This is not a mere temporary protest. It is an orchestrated, full-scale realignment designed to break the chains of dependence and to redefine Canada's strategic approach to global trade. Perhaps one of the most ironic aspects of this unfolding situation is the transformation of economic boycotts into a broader assertion of national identity. In a move driven not solely by profit, but by a deeply felt sense of pride, many Canadians have embraced a campaign of economic self-reliance. This campaign extends far beyond industrial decisions, permeating everyday life. Canadian provinces such as British Columbia have taken a strong stance, banning imports of U.S. agricultural products like milk, chicken, and wine. In parallel, strict inspections at U.S. truck crossings have disrupted traditional supply chains, further isolating American economic influence. Quebec, not to be outdone, has spearheaded initiatives that freeze infrastructure contracts with U.S. contractors and rally citizens to support local products through the Fabrique au Québec campaign. Even essential services in Manitoba and Nova Scotia have shifted, forcing hospitals, schools, and government agencies to remove U.S. goods from public procurement lists. The combined pressure is leaving American brands like Starbucks, McDonald's, and Apple to gradually vanish from Canadian public systems, an outcome that underscores the depth of the economic transformation underway. Amid this whirlwind of economic and political restructuring, Canada's leadership has moved swiftly to consolidate its newfound independence on the global stage. On April 28, 2025, a general election was held at an unprecedented pace in modern Canadian history. The election produced dramatic outcomes, with new Prime Minister Mark Carney emerging as a symbol of a break with the old order. In a series of bold political moves, Carney declared a range of measures designed to fortify the national economy, measures that included the elimination of carbon taxes for consumers, small businesses, and farmers, as well as reversing hikes in capital gains taxes to encourage risk-taking among builders. His declaration that "we are stronger together" resonated deeply with a population increasingly determined to distance itself from American dependence. Leaders from various political parties, including Performance Pierre Pev, leader of the Conservative Party, and Jagmeet Singh of the New Democratic Party, have made it unequivocally clear that Canada will never again be part of an American-dominated economic landscape. Even figures like Trump, whose policies have long influenced American trade strategies, are now relegated to being a memory rather than an operative force in shaping Canada's future. While tensions between the two nations continue to escalate, the economic fallout is beginning to reverberate deeply in the United States. Regions once buoyed by a steady influx of Canadian tourists and investors, such as Florida and Arizona, are now facing stark declines in property values as Canadians rush to unload real estate assets and American tourism revenues shrink. Research groups suggest that if just 10% of Canadian tourism expenditures are reduced, more than 100,000 American jobs could vanish, affecting states like New York, Nevada, and California, areas that have historically relied on the cross-border flow of spending and economic vibrancy. For many Americans, this is more than a financial setback. It is a fundamental shift in the everyday experience of living in a country once assured of a stable energy and economic partnership. And if this were a movie, it might be the moment when the hero realizes that the trusted sidekick has decided to write its own script. The unfolding crisis is stirring intense debate among global economic strategists, as Canada repositions itself through trade agreements and strategic economic decisions. The United States faces increasingly stark choices about its future path. Washington is now forced to question whether it can counteract the rising tide of Canadian independence before the energy crisis escalates into a full-blown economic disaster. The complexity of this predicament is underscored by the sheer scale of the stakes involved, over $700 billion in bilateral trade, and the livelihood of more than 100,000 jobs hang in the balance. As Washington scrambles to devise countermeasures, it finds itself contending with not only immediate supply chain disruptions and soaring domestic prices, but also a long-term reordering of geopolitical power in the energy sector. This is a scenario that leaves policymakers reluctant to declare a final verdict, while the various threads of economic policy intertwine to create a tapestry of uncertainty and risk. In the midst of these unfolding developments, the strategic calculus of international trade is shifting rapidly. The European Union, traditionally a staunch ally with its own complex arrangements with both Canada and the United States, has stepped in to bolster the new order. With Canada's pivot away from its historical focus on the U.S. market, Europe has seized the opportunity to secure stable energy exports and diversify its supply chains, reducing its own dependency on potentially volatile suppliers. Canada's ambitious energy agreements with European nations, along with its expanded role in global energy markets, are now viewed as critical components in fostering economic stability amid the turbulence caused by shifting alliances. In parallel, China and India have locked in long-term contracts with Canada, positioning themselves to capitalize on the country's vast commodity resources, moves that are set to reshape the dynamics of international energy competition. Some might say that if the global economy were a high-stakes poker game, Canada just raised the bet while the U.S. clutched its cards a little too tightly, unwilling to let go of an outdated strategy. A recent spate of retaliatory trade measures further underscores the seriousness of the situation. President Donald Trump, true to his reputation for aggressive protectionism, has once again imposed sweeping tariffs, reimposing a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports from the European Union, actions that have reverberated across transatlantic trade channels. These tariffs, designed to shield key American industries, have in turn sparked retaliatory measures from both the EU and Canada. European responses have included tariffs amounting to up to $28 billion on American goods, specifically targeting products from states that lean towards Republican leadership. Similarly, Canada has implemented tariffs totaling approximately 29.8 billion Canadian dollars, or about $20.7 billion, primarily focusing on its exports of steel and aluminum. The impact of these trade war maneuvers is widespread, affecting not only traditional heavy industries, but also consumer goods and even the automobile manufacturing sector, a crucial part of the U.S. economy that is already battling fierce competition in a globalized market. Amid these tit-for-tat measures, the strategic focus of international trade continues to evolve. Canada's determination to reduce its reliance on American markets is evident in its vigorous pursuit of alternative trade agreements. Through initiatives such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPPP, and other bilateral pacts, Canadian companies are actively restructuring their supply chains and forging new economic partnerships with fast-growing economies like Japan, Australia, Vietnam, and others. In a move that underscores the depth of this shift, Canadian trade delegations have been increasingly visible in Southeast Asia, traveling from Indonesia and Ecuador to Singapore, Australia, and Brunei, in an effort to secure these new markets. The overarching objective is clear: to increase non-U.S. exports by 50% within 2025, thereby ensuring that the Canadian economy is no longer tethered to the unpredictable whims of its southern neighbor. In a twist that might make one wonder if Canada is planning to open its own theme park called Independence Land, this bold strategy is not merely about economics, it's a statement about national pride and self-determination. Beyond the realm of high finance and industrial strategy, the cultural and social ramifications of Canada's pivot are also starting to take shape. In numerous Canadian cities, symbols of national identity are being reasserted in public spaces as a direct challenge to American economic influence. For instance, in the city of Moga, American flags at public locations have been replaced with larger Canadian flags, a symbolic protest against policies perceived as disrespectful and paternalistic. The gesture, while seemingly simple, is laden with a message of empowerment and resistance. It signals that the Canadian people are more than willing to stand up for their rights and assert their independence, even when the economic stakes are extraordinarily high. Such moves are becoming increasingly common, as evidenced by public demonstrations at festivals and sporting events, where expressions of national identity are intertwined with economic boycotts. It is a cultural shift that reminds us that economics and identity are inexorably linked, and that every policy decision carries with it not just financial implications, but also the weight of national sentiment. For those watching this unfolding saga, now is the time to reflect on these monumental shifts and their implications for the future of international trade and energy security. If you find this analysis insightful, consider subscribing to our channel for more in-depth updates and expert analysis on global affairs. Your likes, comments, and shares help us continue to provide you with balanced and comprehensive coverage of these transformative events. What is your opinion on Canada's bold move to reorient its economic partnerships? Do you see it as a necessary corrective measure in response to long-standing trade imbalances? Or is it a risky gamble that could backfire on both sides of the border? We're eager to hear your thoughts in the comments below. As the energy winter approaches, the United States must now contend with a dual crisis, a sudden disruption in energy supplies, and a broader economic reordering that threatens long-held trade relationships. Costs are rising not only in the energy sector, but across the board, from airline tickets to everyday consumer goods, and the U.S. economy finds itself at a critical juncture. Each sector, whether it is energy, manufacturing, or consumer services, is facing unprecedented challenges that demand swift and decisive action. The loss of Canadian energy, which once provided a steady stream of electricity and oil essential for smooth operations during peak demand periods, is causing widespread anxiety. In response, there are growing discussions among American policymakers about investing in alternative energy sources and renegotiating key international partnerships that can help buffer the economic shock. However, the scale of the disruption raises serious questions about the resilience of an economy that has for so long been interlinked with Canadian stability. For instance, in states that traditionally relied on the steady influx of Canadian investments, such as those in Florida, Arizona, New York, Nevada, and California, the economic fallout is already evident. Declining tourism, reduced consumer spending, and falling property values are all contributing to a broader narrative of decline. As American businesses grapple with dwindling revenues and rising operational costs, the question looms large. How can the U.S. recalibrate its economic and energy policies to restore balance in a rapidly shifting global environment? For those watching from across the economic spectrum, the current situation might seem like an ironic plot twist where the dependable partner suddenly turns away, leaving behind a trail of disrupted markets and frustrated stakeholders. Yet the ramifications extend far beyond mere numbers on a balance sheet. The cultural and national identity of both nations is being redefined in real time as citizens, whether in boardrooms, factories, or sports arenas, grapple with the consequences of these bold strategic moves. The transformation is so drastic that even long-standing retail giants are rethinking their supply chains and product offerings in response to changing consumer preferences. In Canada, a growing number of businesses are opting to source and manufacture domestically, a move that not only supports local economies, but also serves as a symbolic repudiation of reliance on American imports. Meanwhile, American companies are faced with the daunting task of reinventing themselves amid intense international competition. The situation is reminiscent of a sarcastic twist in a long-running drama, where allegiances that once seemed unshakable are now being questioned and even ridiculed on the global stage. Political leaders on both sides are acutely aware of the stakes involved. During his first official foreign trip after being appointed, Prime Minister Mark Carney chose to break with tradition by traveling to Europe instead of the United States. His meetings in London with the British Prime Minister and in France with President Emmanuel Macron underscored Canada's determination to forge an independent diplomatic and economic path. Back home, Carney's administration has taken decisive steps to safeguard national interests. Notably, an agreement was signed with Australia valued at $6.5 billion US to establish an over-the-horizon radar system along the Canada-US border, extending coverage from the border into the Arctic. This initiative is not only a defensive measure, but also a bold declaration of Canada's capacity to protect its sovereignty without relying on traditional American military support. The move carries strong political symbolism, indicating that Canada is ready to fortify its own defenses while simultaneously pursuing a more diversified foreign policy agenda. Amid these high-stakes negotiations and trade realignments, the social fabric of Canada is also undergoing a transformation. Citizens are increasingly engaging in acts of collective resistance, boycotting American products, rallying behind domestic brands, and reshaping public spaces to reflect a renewed sense of national pride. These grassroots movements are fueled by a growing sentiment that Canada's long-held position as an American satellite is both outdated and untenable. It is a message that reverberates not only through the corridors of government, but also in the everyday lives of Canadians who are now more than ever determined to support a self-reliant and independent national economy. At the same time, the reverberations are increasingly felt within the United States. With traditional markets now reeling from supply disruptions and rapidly rising prices, American authorities are urgently reassessing strategies to counteract what many are now referring to as an energy winter. This term, once relegated to dramatic headlines in cold weather forecasts, now aptly captures the multifaceted challenges facing an economy deeply intertwined with Canadian energy. U.S. industries are wrestling with the immediate fallout as skyrocketing fuel and electricity prices exert pressure on consumer goods production, transportation, and even technology sectors. In this evolving scenario, the American response, burdened by decades of reliance on an old model of energy and trade, risks appearing as a clumsy attempt to patch up a widening gap, a gap that now signals a significant strategic setback in the international energy competition. While American policymakers deliberate on potential countermeasures, the global economic order is rapidly realigning around Canada's strategy. The transformation is not just about securing alternative energy sources. It is about fundamentally redefining the way nations interact in a world where traditional alliances are no longer taken as given. The European Union, with its critical need to replace Russian energy supplies, has embraced Canada's revised export strategy, forging closer ties that promise long-term stability for both parties. Similarly, emerging markets in Asia have found a reliable partner in Canada as it pivots away from American dependency. This shift has initiated a broader conversation about the future of international trade, one that is increasingly characterized by fragmentation and a reevaluation of global power dynamics. In a sense, it reminds one of the irony that even in the interconnected world of modern economics, sometimes a break in tradition can signal the dawn of a new and unpredictable era. The unfolding scenario presents a number of critical questions. With Canada asserting its independence so decisively, is there still room for the United States to recalibrate its policies and rebuild the long-standing trust that once underpinned its economic relationship with its neighbor? Or is this shift indicative of a broader global trend where regional blocs become more insular and self-sufficient, leaving little room for the old patterns of dependency? As viewers absorb these complex developments, we invite you to think about the broader implications for international trade and security. Do you agree with Canada's strategic pivot, or do you see the loss of such a historic partnership as a gamble that could have unforeseen consequences? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback is invaluable as we continue to dissect these transformative events. Even as the United States recoils from this monumental setback, it is clear that the Canadian strategy is not without its own risks. The ambitious plan to expand non-U.S. exports by 50% within 2025 comes with challenges ranging from logistical hurdles to the intricacies of cultivating trust with new trade partners across Europe and Asia. Such measures require not only robust infrastructure investments, but also a recalibration of domestic production capabilities to meet the demands of a diversified export economy. Maintaining competitive pricing and navigating the shifting terrain of international tariffs and counter-tariffs demands a level of coordination that many industry insiders acknowledge is no small feat. Yet Canada appears undeterred, moving forward with initiatives that seek to harness both its natural resource wealth and its economic ingenuity. In this light, one cannot help but chuckle at the notion that while American industries are busy fretting over skyrocketing energy bills, Canadian companies might be celebrating the arrival of a free upgrade to independence mode, a software update, of course, free of bugs. It is evident that one of the most potent signals emerging from this crisis is a profound sense of national pride that is reshaping Canadian policy and sentiment. In provinces like Quebec, local governments are actively promoting campaigns like the Fabrique au Québec initiative, a call for citizens to support only locally produced goods. This movement, bolstered by direct government subsidies, is not only designed to protect local economies, but also to serve as a bulwark against the relentless tide of American influence. Meanwhile, in British Columbia, the ban on essential U.S. agricultural imports delivers a clear message. Canada is mobilizing all available resources to assert its economic sovereignty. These measures, though seemingly harsh in their immediate impact, are part of a broader strategy to insulate the Canadian economy from external vulnerabilities, an approach born out of a desire to ensure long-term stability and self-determination. As the international community watches with bated breath, the unfolding drama between Canada and the United States serves as a stark reminder that economic alliances, no matter how long-standing, are never immune to the pressures of political and market forces. The recalibration of trade relationships, the imposition of retaliatory tariffs by the EU and the US, and the strategic pivot by Canada all point to a future where regional loyalties and national interests may well override decades of economic interdependence. In this light, Canadians and Americans alike are compelled to reevaluate what it means to be partners in an increasingly unpredictable global landscape. The era of unquestioned dependence appears to be coming to an end, replaced by a more fluid and contested power structure where every decision carries weighty consequences. In conclusion, the recent shutdown of Canada's $13 billion oil export pipeline to the United States is not just an isolated incident of energy disruption. It is the catalyst for a sweeping reordering of international trade, energy policy, and national identity. With rising energy prices, economic realignments, and retaliatory trade measures shaking the foundations of established partnerships, both nations are now faced with the daunting task of navigating a complex and rapidly evolving geopolitical environment. The strategic decisions being made today by policymakers, business leaders, and even individual citizens will reverberate for years to come, reshaping the global economic order in ways that no one could have anticipated just a few months ago. As you absorb these developments, consider the broader implications for our interconnected world. Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era where national pride and self-reliance eclipse decades of interdependence? Or will the United States, with its deep-rooted economic institutions, find a way to recalibrate and restore balance? If you appreciate deep dives into issues that define our modern era, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insightful analysis. Like, comment, and share your thoughts because every voice matters in this ongoing conversation. The choices we make today might well shape the world we live in tomorrow. The stakes have never been higher. From the halls of power in Washington to the bustling streets of Toronto, every decision carries repercussions that extend far beyond the immediate crisis. The recalibration of trade, energy, and policy between Canada and the United States is a vivid illustration of how deeply intertwined our economies have become, and how vulnerable they are when that balance is disrupted. As nations realign and new alliances are forged, the international community is left to ponder the future of old partnerships and the emergence of new paradigms. Only time will tell whether the United States can bridge this divide, or if it will be forced to endure an extended period of economic hardship propelled by the loss of one of its most valuable allies. In this ever-changing arena of global economics and political strategy, we are reminded that even the most reliable partnerships can come under strain when national pride and political maneuvering take center stage. Canada's decision to unplug its economy from the traditional U.S. framework is as much about asserting sovereignty as it is about economic survival. It challenges our long-held assumptions and compels policymakers on both sides of the border to rethink their strategies in a world that is rapidly transforming before our eyes. The repercussions of this recalibration will no doubt serve as a case study for future generations on how economic and political forces can converge to redefine international relations. So, as you reflect on these dramatic turns of events, what do you think is the future of U.S.-Canada relations? Is this a temporary setback for the United States, or does it signal a long-term reordering of global power that will see Canada emerge as a stronger, more independent player on the world stage? We invite you to weigh in with your comments and share your perspective on this unfolding saga. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive, and be sure to stay tuned for our next update as we continue to explore the dramatic shifts reshaping our global economic landscape.